Step 76, long-term fertility planning. When you're starting your IVF treatment cycle, if you want to have more than one child, you need to do a bit of longer-term fertility planning. Depending on your age, your egg reserve, you can do planning to freeze some embryos, sufficient amount of embryos to have a second child after having successful first IVF treatment. Let us assume you want to have 2 kids and your age at the time of starting IVF is 37. Then you need to do a bit of planning, because let us say when you started IVF for first baby, your age is 37. By the time of pregnancy and have your first child, your age will be 38. After a bit of break, when you start trying to for the second child, approximately age of 40, then you will have more difficulties getting high grade eggs and embryos. For that, you need to consider banking or freezing some embryos first before you start transferring embryos for the first child. Essentially, you have here 3 options. Option 1, you can say, forget about the future, let us focus on having first child. And in this case, you create the embryos and keep using up all these embryos to achieve successful pregnancy for the first child. Let us say you created 3 embryos in a fresh cycle. You can transfer one of these embryos in fresh cycle and keep transferring the embryos until you get success. If you run out of embryos, you can create more embryos and keep using up all the high-grade embryos you created. Second option is here, you create some embryos, use one of those embryos in fresh cycle or frozen cycle and freeze the remaining embryos. If not successful, you can create more embryos and create and transfer another embryo. So you can just banking up as you go along. Remember, your chance of having success with each embryo transfer is approximately 35%, which means you may not be successful. You can create new embryos and keep banking up some embryos as you go along. Third option is you really optimize your chance of success having 2 kids, which means you first create the embryos and bank sufficient amount of embryos, which gives you very good chance of having second child, then start transferring embryos for first child. For example, if you banked 4 to 6 embryos before you get pregnant for the first child, you can be 80 to 90% sure that you will have your second child. All this planning at the moment we are making on the basis of only one parameter, which is your age at the time of starting first IVF cycle. If you want to make a more informed decision, then you need to take your AMH or your egg reserve also into account. For example, when you're trying to conceive for first child, if your AMH is already low, so after few years it will be so low, your egg reserve will be so low, your chance of having any good quality embryos will be very, very low, which means you need to do all the hard work now and do a bit of banking before you get pregnant for the first child. This taking into account your age and your current age in AMH is very important in making a longer term fertility planning so that you can achieve your goal of completing your family.